Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Preshow for Monster Monday. I am DM Gallibond, and tonight on the show, we're going to be taking a look at the Death Embrace from the brand new sourcebook called the Netherdeep. So, this is a monster right out of Matt Mercer's Twisted Little Noggin. So let's take a look at what this monster will do at the top of the hour, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can find and how we can use it in our campaigns and how we can reskin it. In the meantime, you're listening to Sirenscape. It's our favorite app here on for running games. Got all kind of great music for your tabletop RPGs and ambient sounds and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to set up my monitors now for the stream. Alright, there we go. That's the one. And then let's go over here. I'll set up the other one. Alright. Excellent. Excellent. How's everybody doing this evening? Sega Dream, nice to see you. Catsup, thanks for stopping by this evening. As we go through, be thinking of any questions that you might have on the Death Embrace, and we will address those at the end of the show. Right here in our friendly tavern, it's very nice. The musicians are up there playing, but we're not gonna stay right here by the stage. Let's go ahead and let's move over a little bit away. Let's go find us a nice little table over by the fireplace. Yeah, that's better. A little bit quieter. Okay. All right. And we're going to get ourselves set up here. Welcome, welcome, viewers. All right, and welcome everybody to Monster Monday for Monday, the 21st of March, 2022. I am DM Gallibond, and tonight on Monster Monday, we are going to be talking about the Death Embrace. Now, I know, last week I mentioned we were going to do another monster from Strixhaven, but I was so busy with so many other projects that I didn't realize that last week was the week that the new Critical Role sourcebook was going to drop. And I thought it was coming out this week, so I had not planned to do anything out of that book until after it dropped. So maybe you caught the live stream on Friday where we kind of went through the book and talked a little bit about it, gave you my first impressions. If you did not, you can find that on the YouTube. The archive is there, as well as all of the archives of all of our content. But tonight we're going to look at one of the monsters out of that particular source book called the Death Embrace. Interesting name. And it is, in fact, kind of a scary monster. We all think of Matt Mercer as running a game that's full of a lot of laughs and a lot of fun and all of that kind of stuff. And the RP has a lot of drama. But man, he can also throw some pretty mean monsters out, and this is one of them. So let's take a look at this. So, the origins of the Death Embrace. PCs will not encounter a Death Embrace in the campaign until they begin to explore the drowned ruins of the city of Kael Morro. And their first glimpse of the creature is described like this. Floating in the middle of the ruined villa is a huge jellyfish-like creature with barbed tentacles. Its bell is covered with a crystalline lattice and has a great axe with veins of ruidium arcing up to the blade wedged in it. Beneath the bell, a tendrillous crimson mass crackles with energy and provides shelter for a school of tiny, sharp-toothed fish. So, the Death Embrace itself is a huge aberration that has emerged from the demiplane of the Netherdeep to haunt the ruins of this drowned city. And it's a new monster created for the Netherdeep the Netherdeep campaign, unlike some other Critical Role monsters that make a curtain call in this campaign after first debuting in other sourcebooks. Now, some of you who are out there watching live, and doubtless some of you who will watch the replay, are much more scholarly and much more versed in the depth of every single session of Critical Role that has aired. Sadly, I am not. I enjoy that show, but with all of the games that I run and all the prep I have to do, I don't have time to watch a whole lot of that. So I looked for some of the sources like the Critical Role wiki and everything. I couldn't find any references to the Death Embrace. So I honestly don't know if at Matt Mercer's table, if they have ever faced one of these. I think it is new for this campaign, but if you're watching live and you know that it appeared somewhere else, please drop that in the chat. Otherwise, if you are watching later on, put that in the comments and let me know when it appeared in the show. All right, so we talked about the sharp-toothed fish, and here is an image of those fish. They are called Sorrowfish, and we're going to talk a little bit about them later on in the show tonight, because they've got kind of an interesting little feature about them. Very cool. So, drifting through the dark waters of the Netherdeep, the Death Embrace is an ominous sight. Beneath its bell hangs a lacy, tendrillous mass that thrums with magic, surrounded by 60-foot-long barbed tentacles. The Death Embrace uses these tentacles to grasp and petrify its prey. Now that's the description straight out of the 5e D&D Beyond, which also includes the description in the campaign. So that description is correct. The monster does not merely paralyze its victims with long tentacles, it petrifies them. So imagine an underwater creature that grabs you, and when it gets you in its tentacles, it turns you to stone. And the fish mentioned in the previous slide are a swarm of Sorrowfish, one hit point minions that use the tentacles of the giant Death Embrace for cover and then feed on victims that get grappled before they turn to stone. So now be paying close attention here, because these fish are going to get a part of our reskinning the monster section later. And it's a bit of humor in a bit of humor, the campaign suggests that the name for these fish comes from the fact that they taste so bad they make anyone who eats them feel regret. So that's where the Sorrowfish get their name. Could also be that if you get entangled by the tentacles of one of these Death Embrace, then your last thought is going to be very sorry that you're getting munched on by these Sorrowfish. So now here's the lore of the Death Embrace. So their entry in the monster section of D&D Beyond indicates they are normally passive hunters that don't seek out prey, and the Death Embrace only attacks creatures that disturb or agitate it. However, within the campaign, The first appearance of one of these creatures is tainted by exposure to ruidium, a magical mineral that has a corrupting effect on the emotions of living creatures. So that means that this particular Death Embrace is aggressive, and it actively seeks out a confrontation with the PCs. In addition to that petrification ability and the swarm of Sorrowfish in its tentacles, the Death Embrace reveals another disturbing feature. Once it has petrified victims, it uses those victims as stone shields to absorb attacks from enemies that attack it during combat. So that means your party could literally kill an ally that has been petrified this monster because the monster keeps putting your ally in the way of the attacks. As yes, that's one of the features. It will grab a petrified victim in its tentacles and use its reaction to make that victim absorb an attack instead of taking the attack itself. So that is a really, really frightening thing. Yes, it can grapple you. Yes, it can turn you to stone. And then it can let your party members beat you to death or crumble you to death because it's going to use you as a statue shield. You would no longer be a humanoid shield, but you would be a statue shield that it just sort of puts up in the way of their attacks every time, every round. So, yeah. Now you know what I said? This is a nasty monster Matt Mercer came up with. All right. We all know that every creature in D&D gets a creature type, and the type for this monster is the aberration. So the this is a monster that the aberrations are monsters that come from another plane, and they are. Oh, whoops! There we go. That's the one I need. They are monsters that come from another plane, and they're very alien. They are not. They don't draw their magical abilities from the mystical forces of the world, but from sort of the alien origins that they come from. So Aboleth, Beholders, Mind Flayers, Slotty, and anything that comes from the Netherdeep are also considered aberrations, apparently. There's actually quite a few cool aberrations in this source book. All right, we're going to go ahead and we are going to switch over here, and we are going to look at the Death Embrace monster in D&D 5e. This is the D&D Beyond version. So we see it's got armor class 13, so it doesn't have very great armor class. 147 hit points. In my opinion, actually kind of weak for a monster that is so large. You think the things that are huge, a lot of dragons are huge, and most of those dragons will have well over 200, sometimes 300 hit points. Now, another thing that could be a factor is that if you look deep within the combat rules in D&D, I believe it's still the rule in 5e that unless you have some kind of feature that mitigates it, anytime you have combat underwater, the damage you do from your attacks is halved because your weapons are normally designed to go through air and not through water. And so it means that you just do half damage. So 147 hit points may be closer to dealing out 300 hit points to actually kill that. So that could be one factor. And it's very slow. It only swims at 20 feet. It's got, its physical stats are pretty high. Good strength, fair dex, and a good con. But the intelligence, wisdom, charisma, it's barely above animal. Barely above animal intelligence or wisdom. Then it is got blind sight to 60 feet and is completely blind beyond that radius. has the petrifying tendrils. So any creature starts its turn in Death Embrace must make a DC 16 con save. On the failed save, it's restrained, and a creature restrained in this way must repeat the saving throw at the end of the next turn, becoming petrified on a failed saving throw, or ending the effect in a successful one. Petrified condition lasts until the effect is ended by Greater Restoration spell or similar magic. And then Reel, at the start of each of its turns, the Death Embrace can pull each creature it's grappling up to 20 feet toward it. No action is required. And it can only breathe underwater. Multi-attack, and it makes 2 tentacle attacks. The attacks are plus 10 with a 60-foot reach. So those tentacles are 60 feet long, and it can reach all the way out there. So if you have a bunch of melee characters in your party, ouch, that could be a long fight. Piercing damage plus psychic damage on every attack. If the target is large or smaller, it's grappled with that DC 16 escape check. And it has 6 tentacles, each of which can grapple 1 target. So, it can grapple 6, it can basically grapple and petrify your entire party. So now the reaction is the body shield. When Death Embrace is hit by attack, one creature that Death Embrace is grappling takes the damage instead. So now, because that's a reaction, it can do that 1 time. So if you have a party of 5 and 2 of your party members get grappled and get used as statue shields in that way, well, it can only use one of them every round to deflect an attack. The other attacks that you have, especially if you're using magic or some sort of ranged attacks or something like that, will actually land as long as they hit the AC of 13. Now let's talk a little bit about the guys that use these tentacles for cover. And this is the swarm of Sorrowfish. And these guys are a real piece of work. So individually, they're very weak. An individual Sorrowfish has 1 hit point. And basically it just bites. And it doesn't really do a whole lot of damage by itself. But you get a whole swarm of them as lives in the tentacles of the Death Embrace. Then it's another story altogether. So it's collective armor class of 14. Collective 104 hit points, 30 feet swimming speed. It's resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, immune to psychic damage. And look at all those conditions it is immune to. Charmed, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, prone, restrained, and stunned. Blind sight 60 feet. And the swarm capability. So it can occupy another creature's space and vice versa. Swarm can move through an opening as narrow as 1 foot. Swarm can't regain hit points or gain temporary hit points. Then Virulent Sorrow. Each time the swarm takes damage, any creature within 5 feet of it must make a DC 13 saving throw. On a failed save, the creature suffers the following effects until the end of its next turn. Has disadvantage on attack rolls, can't take reactions, and its speed is halved. So that's pretty nasty. That's a pretty nasty effect. Now you're slow. Now you have disadvantage on attacks. And you're in range of these tentacles of this big monster that might turn you to stone. Starting to get a picture of how nasty this kind of encounter could be. And then you have the swarm of bites. So +8 to hit and 66 piercing damage, or 3d6 piercing damage if the swarm has half its hit points or fewer. And then it's opening gambit. A recharging desolate drain. So every creature in the swarm space must make a DC 13 wisdom save. On a failed save, it takes 7d6 psychic damage and is stunned until the end of its next turn. Guess what? If you got grappled and then the fish stun you, you have no way of making that saving throw to avoid being petrified. Sorry. So the effect ends when a creature of the storm moves out of the creature's space, or if another creature within 5 feet of the swarm uses an action to make a DC 14 strength check, pulling the affected creature out of the swarm in a successful check. On a successful saving throw, the creature takes half as much damage and suffers no other ill effects. So that is, yeah. That's like, this is like the big 1-2 punch. And plus, remember, you encounter these guys, you're already underwater. So for most PCs, most kind of humanoid race PCs, you're already very much behind the 8-ball if you happen to go up against one of these things. All right, so let's go back and let's take a look at the rest of our slides here. So, how might we use, or when might we use, a Death Embrace in an encounter? So if we want to create a hard or challenging encounter for these creatures for a party of 5 PCs, keep in mind that Death Embrace is a CR 11 monster. So at party level of 7 or 8, just the Death Embrace by itself is a hard encounter. If it's a level 9 or 10 party, then it becomes a medium encounter. Now you can add a Scuttling Serpent Maw, which is another aberration out of this source book, when we're not talking about tonight. And if you have a party that's level 11 to 15, it becomes an easy encounter. At level 15, you can add 2 swarms of Sorrowfish to make it a hard encounter. And then the Scuttling Serpent Maw is something you would add at level 10 to make it a hard encounter. Alright, so that is using them in encounters. Now, if you are a player and your DM gets that greedy look in his eyes or her eyes, and they describe that you guys are about to fight a Death Embrace that looks like, oh, it just wants to come and hug you and hold you and pet you and call you George. If you're old enough, you remember where that comes from. All right, keep your distance, first of all, as a party member, so the Death Embrace can reach targets up to 60 feet away with those tentacles. By all means, avoid getting grappled. Getting grappled can lead to a fate worse than death. You'll not just take HP damage from being in the grasp of the creature, but you may wind up being turned to a very lifelike statue of yourself. And coordinate your attacks. If an ally gets grappled, be very tactical about your attacks, because the Death Embrace can use a reaction to force a grappled victim to take the damage from your attacks, instead of the Death Embrace taking that damage itself. And finally, don't get swarmed. Swarms of Sorrowfish often use the tentacles of the Death Embrace for cover. Nasty creatures can deliver vicious bites that deal both physical and psychic damage. Alright, now, if you are behind the screen and you want to throw one of these at your party because, well, just because you're sadistic, maybe, you can have a lot of fun with this encounter if you consider fun killing the PCs that your players have worked so hard to level. Now, I'll tell you, the drawback of that is unless you have players that like playing those kind of games where there is no way to survive the game, then you do that too often and you're not going to have many players left that want to play at your table, because if they really work hard on their characters, they want those characters to survive if at all possible. They know there's a possibility they might die, but just killing them willy-nilly is not a great way to keep players at your table. So this monster is horrifying in several ways. You should use all of them to your advantage as a DM. First is that extreme 60-foot reach of its tentacles. Once a PC fails the first Constitution saving throw to be restrained, tell the player they feel their muscles seizing up, and perhaps you can even hint that a stony, scaly material appears on patches of their skin, just to give them a little bit of foreshadowing of what's about to happen if they fail the next saving throw. Then at that point, once you have somebody grasped in a tentacle, loose the swarm of Sorrowfish to begin devouring the grappled PC. Use that desolate drain feature of the swarm to force another saving throw to avoid being stunned for a round. And when the PC's allies make their attack, reveal the second horror by having the Death Embrace move the grappled character in front of the attack to take the damage with its reaction. And when the PC fails the second Constitution check against the grapple, let their allies watch in horror as the character turns to stone before their eyes. That is just a way to really kind of set a tone that, oh boy, this is going to be a bad fight. That, you can do that. And if you, like I said, if you don't do that too often, that can really turn a battle into some kind of heroic struggle for the literal survival of the entire party. But if you throw too many encounters like this in a row at your players, they're probably not going to want to play very long. All right, so now where would this appear in your campaign? So Death Embrace is a great enemy for late Tier 2, early Tier 3 party. In Call the Netherdeep, the first one of these monsters the party encounters is an unavoidable encounter since the rhodium-corrupted Great Axe stuck in the bell of the creature is necessary to move the plot forward, and the monster is aggressive because of its exposure to the magical mineral. So now in a homebrew campaign, the combination of a Death Embrace and a swarm of Sorrowfish might be just the way to throw a very scary encounter at your party. Even if the Death Embrace is rather tranquil, the Sorrowfish might emerge from the tentacles to attack the PCs, and that disturbance and agitation may cause the Death Embrace to be triggered to join the combat. So, you can, if your PCs see this in the distance and they have some inkling of what it is, they may try to stay away. But if they get any closer than 60 feet, then that swarm may come out, and just the swarm starting to attack the PCs, so that might just be enough of a disturbance in the water that the Death Embrace reaches out a tentacle to try to deal with whatever is agitating the fish. Alright, so now let's talk a little bit about reskinning this monster. So early on I said the Sorrowfish would figure into the reskinning. So one thing I think is a little bit peculiar, and I would love to know whether this was Matt Mercer's intent or whether he pitched a different idea and the editors at Wizards of the Coast said, no man, that's just too mean. That goes beyond the pale for 5e. We can't throw a combination like that into a campaign of this level. So here's my thinking of how you would reskin the Death Embrace and the Sorrowfish together. So I think it's really strange that the Sorrowfish do not eat stone as well as flesh. So a very easy reskin would be to have the Death Embrace covered in a stony shell on its bell, which might push the AC up a bit. So then you would find out throughout the encounter where this stony carapace comes from. The school of Sorrowfish would feed on grappled victims both before and after they are petrified. And if the PCs can observe the monsters and their symbiotic relationship before an encounter, perhaps allow them to see the Sorrowfish munching on a statue for a little bit and then swim up to the bell and regurgitate a kind of cement-like paste onto the bell of the Death Embrace, showing that the huge monster's stony armor is actually made up from previous victims it has petrified and the Sorrowfish have eaten and regurgitated on it. Now you see, that to me would be a great way of having this be an even more intimidating and terrifying combination if you threw this in an encounter. So that's like the real easy kind of low-hanging fruit for reskinning this monster. But you could also imagine other versions of this monster being found in various locations, like the Underdark. You know how there's all these creatures in the Underdark that they have the tentacle creatures which float in the air. Well, maybe there's a version of this kind of creature that floats in the air. And maybe instead of the fish, the symbiotic relationship it has are with creatures that are kind of like sturges or bats that mechanically do the same thing as the sorrowfish or the swarm of sorrowfish does. And then you could also imagine taking this to the different elemental planes. It would be easy to have something like the Death Embrace in the elemental plane of water, but then you could also put it in the elemental plane of air. You could have it in the elemental plane of fire and elemental plane of earth as well, where, you know, the one in the elemental plane of fire, all those tentacles could deliver fire damage, and in earth they might deliver acid damage. In the plane of air, they might deliver electrical damage, and in water, they might deliver cold damage instead of the psychic. So you could imagine very much. And then if you think about a version of this creature that might exist in places like the Feywild or the Shadowfell, what kind of damage would those would those deal? Or something like this that's in the Astral Sea, that might deal radiant damage with those tentacles. So, lots of very interesting things that you could do in terms of reskinning, and take sort of the mechanical components of this creature and just put it in a slightly different environment and give it a slightly different flavoring, depending on where your campaign is, if you wanted to use something like that. All right. I believe that's going to take us to our Q&A. So let me go and take a look. I don't see any questions on this screen yet. And I don't see any over here either. All right. So what I would like to do, I'd like to go on into the wrap up, and then I will come back and take a look and see if there are any questions. Well, I have been DM Gallibond, and this has been Monster Monday. We're looking at the Death Embrace from the new Call of the Netherdeep sourcebook. It's a fun sourcebook. It's a pretty cool campaign, and as we talked about on Friday night, there's a few elements out of this campaign that I think might be interesting to look at and see if you could tease out those elements and maybe use them in your own homebrew campaigns. I have 4 streams that I normally do every week. On Sunday afternoon, we do the Walker of Waterdeep, although that is not going to be coming up this Sunday. There's an opportunity that the U.S. men's national team could secure a spot in the World Cup, and they are playing at my home stadium. So where my local MLS team plays, that is hosting the game. So it's an easy drive downtown to go watch that World Cup qualifier. So that's always fun to go do. So we won't be having the Walker of Waterdeep, which is our Planeswalking 5th edition game, on Sunday afternoon. On Thursday night at 8 p.m., we have another 5th edition game. It's the Sword Coast Chronicles, and we will be having that. They just finished up last session a fight against Imrith, the Doom of the Desert, an ancient blue dragon. They finally defeated her along with their giant and metallic dragon allies, and they now are getting ready to explore her lair and see all of the goodies that they might find, and also see what they're going to be allowed to keep, since they do have giants and metallic dragons as allies, who are all of them are going to want their cut. That's for sure. All right, so then the Saturday night, we are going to be having our campaign this week. Saturday night, we have our 2nd edition game, Saturday Night Greyhawk, and we are using 2nd edition rules to go look at to go play through the original Temple of Elemental Evil. And that is just one big, huge dungeon crawl. Because now they've gotten down into the dungeons underneath the temple, and it's just combat after combat after combat after combat. And the only break you get is when you finally decide to run away and try to get out. And then every time you go back in, it's just combat after combat after combat. So that's a very fast-moving game on Saturday night. And if you like the old rules or you're curious about the old rules, come and check us out at 7:30 p.m. All right, and all of the live streams are on Twitch. You can also find all of our archives for everything that I do on YouTube. And we do have a Patreon that if you want to help us do more stuff, you can go ahead and join us over there on the Patreon. Now, next week, we are getting back to the Strixhaven, the Curriculum of Chaos source book, and we are going to be looking at the Demagosts. And then I think when we finish up looking at all the monsters in Strixhaven, I'll see whether we want to come back and start going through the monsters from this source book. So, all right, let me go back and take a look and see if we have any questions over here. Okay, I don't see any questions on this screen. What about over here? Okay, I don't see any questions right now. Then in that case, I am going to go and bring the music back up, and I'm going to change over here, change over to this view here, and I'll go ahead and move us to this slide, and I'm going to look to find somebody else who is streaming some D&D, and we will go ahead and we will raid them. So let's take a look and see who is going to be running some D&D. Oh no, Amish. You're busy cleaning up a dropped can of soda. Oh, sorry to hear that. Hope you didn't get any on your keyboard. Alright. And then let's see who all is running some stuff. Okay. Big Nate, 1998. Looks like he is running something. So let's go ahead and let us raid Big Nate, 1998. All right, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out tonight. Hope you enjoyed. I hope we will see you on more streams. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow us on Twitch. And we will talk to you later. Hey, Doors of Fear, thanks for hanging out. All right, everyone. We're going to send you off to Big Nate. But before I do, just a reminder. Watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.